Hi, welcome to the channel. So today I'm reacting to a video from the World War II channel with Indian Idol. This is the Kokoda Trail. And if you know anything about Australia in World War II, then you know that the Kokoda Track campaign was one of the most significant battles in the Pacific War because it was the first time that Imperial Japan land forces had been defeated by the Allies. Let's get to it.
It's hard to imagine a more hostile and desolate place to fight a war than in the jungles of New Guinea. Yet it is here that the Australians decide to face the Japanese and defend their homeland. It will result in a battle not just between the two warring countries, but one against the forces of nature, which redefines what a military nightmare really is.
If you want to help support the channel, I would appreciate a like. And please go to his channel also and give them a like. Thank you.
I'm Indian Idol. This is a World War II special about the Kokoda Track campaign. To understand why the Japanese decided to put their efforts into this incredibly remote trail, we have to go back to April of this year.
Before he gets into it, Japan wanted New Guinea so it could further isolate Australia, as well as to establish airfields and ports so it could actually launch attacks onto the mainland of Australia. And as you can see from the map, they're only separated by a few miles.
During the spring, we saw how the Japanese set their eyes on Port Moresby, right? Its capture was deemed vital to further isolate Australia from the United States and prevent the Allies from using it as an airbase against recently conquered Rabaul, which acts as the cornerstone of the Japanese southern perimeter. However, their attempt to invade by sea was thwarted by American carriers during the Battle of the Coral Sea the following month. After the losses suffered at Midway in June, a naval invasion of Port Moresby was out of the question, and the Japanese had to look for alternatives. An overland offensive was the logical answer. The Japanese already possessed bases on New Guinea's northern coast at Lae and Salamaua, and the Allies had thus far shown little determination to defend this flank. So surely an attack southward against Port Moresby's northern flank was going to catch the Allies off guard. But does Port Moresby even have a northern flank? The Japanese knew little about the area, relying on a vague account by a British explorer who talks of a road to Port Moresby and the report of a rookie reconnaissance pilot. But orders went out to the South Seas Force, attached to Harukichi Hyakutaki's 17th Army, to perform a feasibility study before they would commit to an all-out offensive. On July 15th, however, orders were revised by imperial decree. There would be no waiting for the feasibility study to finish. 17th Army's South Seas Force is to launch its attack on Port Moresby as soon as possible. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, however, the Allies are no longer sitting idly on New Guinea and have been making plans of their own. On the very same day that the imperial order to capture Port Moresby lands on Hyakutaki's desk, Southwest Pacific Area Commander Douglas MacArthur issues his plan for the development of an airbase on the northern coast in Operation Providence. The first units are to leave Port Moresby on foot by the end of the month for this purpose, but intelligence reports soon reveal they might not have that long. A Japanese transport fleet is spotted gathering at Rabaul, and intelligence reports mark an increase in radio traffic referring to an overland route to Port Moresby. The Allies must make haste. However, that is easier said than done. Contrary to the reports the Japanese are relying on, all there is between Port Moresby and the northern coast at Buna is a narrow, winding trail where vehicular transport is impossible. The U.S. Army's official history provides the following poignant description. The Japanese could scarcely have chosen a more dismal place in which to conduct a campaign. The rainfall at many points in the peninsula is torrential. The terrain, as varied as it is difficult, is a military nightmare. Towering saw-toothed mountains, densely covered by mountain forest and rainforest, alternate with flat, malarial coastal areas made up of matted jungle, reeking swamp, and broad patches of knife-edged kunai grass 4 to 7 feet high. The heat and the humidity in the coastal areas are well nigh unbearable, and in the mountains there is biting cold at altitudes over 5,000 feet. The mountains are drained by turbulent rivers and creeks, which become slow and sluggish as they reach the sea.
The height of those mountains were no joke. Some soldiers even got altitude sickness.
Along the streams, the fringes of the forest become interwoven from ground to treetop level with vines and creepers to form an almost solid mat of vegetation, which has to be cut by the machete or the bolo before progress is possible.
Bolo?
The Japanese are in for a surprise. In the early morning of July 21st, after a short naval bombardment, the Japanese South Seas Force begins disembarking near the coastal villages of Bona and Guna. Apart from some aerial attacks, the landings proceed mostly unopposed. Engineers start improving the local infrastructure, while one Army battalion from the 144th Regiment and one battle from the Special Naval Landing Force move to their first objective, the Kokoda airstrip.
About 1,500 of the jungle warfare specialists were actually deployed, and I think they were a part of those naval special landing troops. I'm not sure though. Regardless, up until this campaign, the jungle warfare specialists were thought to be invincible.
At this point, the only forces in a position to oppose them are the local militias of the Papuan Infantry Battalion and just one company of Australians from the 39th Battalion. Together, they form Marobra Force. More men from the 39th Battalion are on the way, but just one transport plane is available to fly them into Kokoda, forcing most to make the long trek over the Kokoda Trail. The Australians and Papuans engage in a series of ambushes to win time, but by the 29th, the airfield is in Japanese hands, while Marobra Force falls back to Deniki. With the capture of Kokoda, Phase 1 of the Japanese offensive is completed. A lull in the fighting sets in, which both sides use to bring up their reinforcements. The now fully strengthened 39th Battalion attempts to retake the initiative with a counterattack on Kokoda, but this fails, and the battalion is pushed back to Isorava. Reinforced by the Malaya Campaign veterans of the 41st Regiment and the remaining battalions of the 144th Regiment, General Tomitaro Hori's South Seas Force resumes the advance on August 25th with an attack on Isorava. By then, large parts of the Australian 30th and 21st Brigades have arrived to join Marobra Force, bringing numerical strength to parity, roughly. However, using mountain guns and flanking maneuvering, Hori's troops managed to break the Isorava defenses by the 30th.
So the Australian chocolate soldiers were actually a big part of this battle. So were those two Australian battalions the Choco or chocolate soldiers?
This signals the start of a general fighting retreat by the Australians. They set up numerous rear guards to inflict maximum losses and to stall the...
If I'm not mistaken, I believe that is a 30 cal machine gun, which was very effective in jungle environments, especially against the Japanese when they were doing their human wave kamikaze attacks. U.S. Marine John Bastilone used a 30 cal when he actually earned the Medal of Honor on the Battle of Guadalcanal in 1942. I'm not sure what kind Bastilone used, but I think Australians used some kind of Browning maybe.
Japanese as much as possible. In this, they are aided by the Owen Stanley mountain range, which runs down the center of the peninsula like a spine and gives defending forces a significant advantage. Marobra Force eventually chooses Mission Ridge to make its stand, but another Japanese outflanking maneuver infiltrates its rear, forcing the Australians to fall back on the Ioria-Baiwa ridgeline. Here, 25th Brigade arrives to relieve some of Marobra Force, while command passes from 21st Brigade Commander Arnold Potts to 25th Brigade Commander Kenneth Either. Japanese forces again compromise the Australian positions, and Either requests permission from Divisional Commander Arthur Tubby Allen to withdraw his troops to Imita Ridge, the last major natural obstacle before Port Moresby. Allen approves of the plan, but warns Either, "There won't be any withdrawal from the Imita position, Ken. You'll die there if necessary."
That is so odd, because I think General MacArthur was quoted as saying almost the exact same thing to one of his commanders before he went into battle on New Guinea, actually.
However, unbeknownst to them, Japanese strength is rapidly deteriorating by the day. See, each Japanese unit takes 16 days of provisions with it during the initial landings, right? By the first weeks of September, those provisions have long since run out. Captured food stocks alleviate some of the strain on the supply line, but those are becoming rarer and rarer as Australian strength grows.
Supply line problems was one of the reasons why Japan lost this battle. Japan actually lost a lot of soldiers in this battle because of malnutrition and exhaustion.
Some transport ships have brought in supplies, sure, but with insufficient aerial cover and diversions to Guadalcanal and Milne Bay, only sporadic deliveries are made. The supplies that do arrive still have to make their way up the track, leaving it up to carriers to haul the load for days on end. Although the Japanese do bring in a few hundred Korean and Formosan laborers to assist in this effort, both sides largely relied on the native Papuan population to
The fuzzy wuzzy angels, heroes of this campaign,
carry their supplies and their wounded. And while the Australians generally maintain good relations with the Papuans through official regulations about pay and treatment of the carriers, whom they affectionately call fuzzy wuzzy angels, the Japanese do not. Many of their carriers desert, further complicating their already problematic supply lines. It is at Imita Ridge, from where they can see the night lights of Port Moresby, that the supply problems really catch up with the Japanese. With no prospect of immediate improvement, 17th Army Commander Hyakutake orders Hori to preserve his strength and withdraw back down the Kokoda Trek. Hori is crushed. Had he remained, though, his forces might quite literally have been crushed, as the Australians are now ready to take the fight to the Japanese. While the Japanese supply lines further disintegrated every step they took towards Port Moresby, quite the opposite was true for the Australians, who have gained in strength. With the 25th Brigade in the lead and the newly arrived 16th Brigade following closely behind, the Australians begin their pursuit. And they are horrified to see what the Japanese leave behind. Mentally exhausted and physically on the brink of starvation, some Japanese soldiers have resorted to cannibalism to stay alive, leaving mutilated Australian corpses behind. However, Japanese bodies are also piling up from diseases like malaria, dengue fever, and scrub typhus. They take most of the wounded with them, but many cannot make the march, and they are left to die by the wayside, sometimes with grenade in hand, to take both their own and their captors' lives.
That was because of the Bushido Code, which was always obey authority and fight to the death. So the Japanese could never surrender, because to do so would be to break the code, which was fight to the death. It was the same reason why the Japanese soldiers treated all of its POWs horribly. They thought of the POWs as dishonorable for actually surrendering and breaking the code.
Now it's up to the Japanese to employ the same delaying tactics the Australians used during their withdrawal. In this, they succeed. But by October 22nd, the Australians are at the main Japanese defenses at Aora Creek, just south of Isarava. The remnants of the 41st and 144th Regiments managed to hold the Australian 16th Brigade, which has replaced the 25th at the front, off for another week before continuing the withdrawal. Hori decides to give Kokoda up without a fight, since the place has a big risk of encirclement, and instead digs in at the narrow approaches to Oivi and Gorari. For the Australians, this opens up the opportunity to bypass the Owen Stanley Range and deliver supplies right to the front, a luxury the Japanese did not have on the opposite end of the trail. After several days of resupplying, 16th Brigade attacks the Japanese head-on at Oivi, while the 25th Brigade flanks around south through the thick jungle to cut the Japanese rear at Gorari.
So quick question. This campaign lasted 3 or 4 months or so. Were the soldiers on the track the entire time, or were they rotated out at all? Because I can't imagine just being stuck on that track for 3 or 4 months. I mean, that is just horrible.
By November 11th, the Japanese are forced to retreat to avoid encirclement, but it is not the organized withdrawal of earlier. They leave a lot of their guns and equipment behind on the Kamusi River's west bank as they retreat to the beachheads of Buna and Gona. Hori himself drowns during the crossing when his canoe is swept out to sea and capsizes. After nearly 4 months of campaigning, the Japanese are now back where they began. And it is here that this tale comes to an end. The Australians have lost around 1,700 men killed or wounded in the fighting. The Japanese, 2,000-ish. However, thousands more succumbed to disease on both sides, particularly the Japanese, where exhaustion and malnutrition were more widespread. Of course, the battle for New Guinea and the Japanese beachheads at Buna and Gona is far from over, and I cover it in our weekly episodes.
And let's not forget a few hundred of the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels, as well as the Papua New Guinea Infantry Battalion also died.
But the Kokoda track campaign is. So, together with the jungles of Guadalcanal and the swamps of Milne Bay, it is on the heights of the Kokoda track that the Allies have checked the Japanese southward thrust, marking a turning point in the Pacific theater. All right, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.
So here's a fact that has pissed off Australians for decades. American General MacArthur, had insisted that New Guinea was mostly an American accomplishment and completely downplayed everything the Australians did, which is unfortunate. My heart does go out to all those who fought and died during that campaign. If you do want to watch another video on Australia and World War II, here you go. Thanks for watching.